Welcome to another Striper Season Update brought to you by West Marine. This 4th of July weekend, we're seeing lots of big fish moving up Long Island and into the rips of Montauk. Narragansett Bay is still holding fish, and up into Cape Cod, there's no shortage of opportunities to bend the rod. The North Shore of Massachusetts and up into Maine has also seen consistent fishing for some of those bigger class fish. Generally speaking, you're going to want to look outside of those shallow inshore waters and look for areas that are in close proximity to deeper, cooler water as we get into the hot month of July. This particular weekend though, we're looking at a spell of rough weather with a northeast wind. That might keep some of the boat guys off the water, but it opens up opportunities for shore-based anglers. With rough weather in the forecast for this holiday weekend, we're going to talk about some tips and tricks that you can use to find big fish in rough surf. All right, here we are in 4th of July weekend, and it's looking like we're going to have to make some modifications to the family barbecue and boat ride because we have a stiff northeast wind coming in. But that opens up a lot of opportunities for surf-based fishermen to catch some big fish in rough water. So that's what we're going to talk about in this week's Striper Season Update brought to you by West Marine. So the first tool at my disposal when I'm looking for big striped bass from the beach is windy.com. And you can also download the Windy app. But basically, it's a free tool that you can either download onto your phone or open up in a web browser. And that's going to tell you the wind direction, and it's also going to tell you the wind velocity. Windy also overlays that all on top of a map. And so that tells you exactly how the wind is oriented based on the location that you want to fish. And for the most part, when I'm looking for big striped bass in rough water, I'm looking for that surf to be as rough as possible. So I want that wind directly in my face. You can see the little streaks here. That's kind of indicative of the exact direction and velocity of the wind. And I want that to be perpendicular with the shore. I want it to be basically 90 degrees facing the shore there. That's going to do one of two things. That's going to improve wave activity. Pardon me, I should say increase wave activity. And that's going to move more water over the structure, which creates a better feeding opportunity for striped bass. And it's also going to push the bait closer to shore. So the effect of the wind being right in your face is kind of twofold. It brings the bait in and it creates a better feeding opportunity for striped bass. There's also another hidden feature of windy.com, and that is the pressure tool, which is over here if you go to the more layers tab here. And then towards the bottom, there's a setting called pressure. So you want to click that and it's going to bring up this blue, white, and orange, dark orange kind of thing. And the dark orange is indicative of high pressure. The white is indicative of neutral. And blue means low pressure, which is what you want. You want that low pressure system going on. So what that's going to do is, for whatever reason, striped bass just have a tendency to put the feed bag on a lot harder when you're in a low pressure system. That's not to say that you can't have great fishing during high pressure, but for whatever reason, they just seem to chew a lot better when the barometer or pressure is dropping. So those are kind of the two features that I look for, two things that I look for while using the Windy app. And the Windy app is a phenomenal free tool that you can use to gauge them. Next up, my next tool sounds kind of odd, but I keep a tab on what the boat guys are up to. So the next tool at my disposal is keeping track of what the boat guys are up to and where they are catching big fish. So usually that's not going to impact my day-to-day fishing routine too much, but in the event that a stiff onshore wind is kind of going over the area where these big fish have been caught and pushes them to shore, that's a good area to focus on from the surf. In the Northeast, there are a lot of places that striped bass can be at any given time, so it's advantageous to keep your eyes peeled for opportunities where that onshore wind is going to push that biomass of fish towards shore. And it's also worth noting that you don't have to be in the closest possible piece of land to good boat action to kind of capitalize on this principle. You just have to be in the general vicinity. So those two tools can put you in the right place at the right time, but you still have to get the fish to eat. And that's where upsizing your tackle comes into play. And by upsizing, I mean throwing lures that are going to be heavier, that are going to punch well into the wind, and that are also going to work no matter how rough it is. So my favorite way to target striped bass in rough surf is on topwater. And I'm going to make a slight adjustment to the plugs that I'm throwing for the most part in that rough surf. Usually in most surf situations in calmer surf, I'm going to be using floating pencils and floating poppers, lures that don't sink on their own when they're just at rest. But when it's really rough and you need to punch out farther, I'm going to go over to sinking pencils and sinking poppers. And what that's going to do is they're going to cast a lot further because they're denser and they're going to punch out better into the wind. And they're also going to be less impacted. The action of the plug, I should say, is going to be less impacted by the waves and the wind. And it's going to be easier to stay in contact with that denser, heavier, sinking plug. So another great option for fishing rough surf are bottle plugs. Bottle plugs are a good alternative to minnow plugs in really rough surf situations because they're going to cast much farther because they're a lot heavier, generally speaking. And they have a much more aggressively cupped face, so they're going to track really well no matter how strong the current is. And it's also one of those lures that you can feel working. So they cast great. They hold really well in the current. They're not really impacted by the wind either, and you can feel them working. So while other baits might get washed out, a bottle plug is going to hold true and stay in the zone while you're fishing that rough surf. Another option if you're fishing a shallower area with a lot of side-to-side sweep is a darter. A darter is a great way to put a large profile into the water. They don't cast quite as well as, a topwater bait or even a bottle plug. But a darter is going to swim really naturally, and it's going to hold true in really strong sweeps. And they have a nice action that kind of goes side to side like that. You can't feel it working quite the same way you can as a bottle plug, but as long as you dig that face in on the first few cranks and stay in contact with the plug, you're going to be fishing. Learning how to fish darters was kind of tricky for me, but I got my first few fish on them in rough surf, so it's a great time to get familiar with those plugs too. They work in a lot of different conditions, but rough surf, great time to learn how to fish darters. And last but certainly not least are metals. Metals are a great way to present a smaller bait in really rough surf. Long, slender metals like diamond jigs and Hopkins spoons are great sand eel imitators, while other options like a Castmaster are really good at imitating peanut bunker. And as we progress through the season and approach, I know it seems like a long way off now, but eventually approach the fall run, sand eels and peanut bunker are going to be key. And as that weather keeps getting nastier and nastier as fall approaches, they're a great option for imitating those baits. And we have a ton of sand eels around. Hopefully we get a ton of peanut bunker too. And with the amount of pogies around, it seems like we hopefully will. So those are two great options for imitating those baits in the daytime, especially. We've done a lot of talking now about fishing in rough surf, so I want to show you guys some GoPro footage of a great outing I had last season in really rough surf and kind of walk you through my thought process as I was fishing. All right, so here we are in some nearly gale force conditions. First and foremost, you want to make sure that you have good, proper attire, you have good footwear, that you're safe, and you'll see those first really fast cranks right there, and that is to get in contact with the plug. That's super important, to get in contact with the plug as soon as possible. One of the things you'll notice is that I had my rod, I was working with sidearm, and the purpose of that is to keep as much line out of the wind as possible, because you're dealing with a lot of crosswind. You don't want that bow in your line to take away from your hook set, so managing your line and staying in contact with the plug is really key. And so in this video, I'm throwing a sinking popper with a dressed back hook. That is a really large profile that you can punch out really far into the surf. And because it's sinking, it's easier to stay in contact with it and work it properly, even through all the slop, chop, and waves out there. So the reason I went with a topwater plug is because I know I'm not casting into more than probably 5 feet or so of water. And I figure it's broad daylight. If the bass are there, they're going to be aggressive enough to hit a topwater plug. So I was able to get it out there, and I had confidence that I would get bit. So make sure you take the time to revive these fish. Make sure you can do so safely, of course, but you really want to make sure you give these fish a chance to recuperate before you send them off. Thank you for tuning in to this Striper Season Update brought to you by West Marine.